They told me it was for my own good. That was the phrase they used, a soft, blunting weapon wrapped in the velvet of concern. My son Robert said it first, his hand resting on my shoulder, a weight I had once found comforting, but which now felt like the first shovelful of earth. My daughter Sarah echoed him, her eyes glistening with what I was meant to interpret as sympathetic tears, but which I now recognized as the bright, hard sheen of resolve. It was for my own good, this room, this place, this neatly packaged end to a life I'd built with my own two hands. The room was painted a shade of beige that I came to think of as managed decline. It was the color of surrender. It absorbed light without reflecting it, a flat, tired surface that promised nothing. There was a single window that overlooked a meticulously manicured lawn where no one ever walked. A single bed with starched white sheets that smelled of industrial bleach, not the lavender and sunshine of the linens I'd washed and hung on the line for 40 years. A small chest of drawers, a single armchair, and a bathroom with more grab bars than a jungle gym. This was to be my world now, confined, managed, and beige. My husband, Richard, had been gone for a year. The silence he left behind was a physical presence in our house, a vast, echoing space that I'd been slowly, painstakingly learning to navigate. I still spoke to him, not in a way that would worry my children, but in the quiet, conversational hum of a long marriage. I would see a cardinal at the feeder outside the kitchen window and say, "Look, Richard, your favorite." I would pull a weed from the rose bushes he had planted for our 10th anniversary and murmur about the stubbornness of thistle. The house was not empty. It was filled with the architecture of our life together. The worn spot on the hardwood floor by his armchair, the faint pencil marks on the pantry door frame tracking our children's height, the chipped teacup he always insisted tasted better. It was an archive of love. The fall had been the excuse they needed, a simple misstep on the garden path, my ankle twisting on a loose flagstone. It was painful, yes, and humbling. I had spent a few weeks with my foot elevated, feeling foolish and frustrated, but it was healing. The doctor said I was recovering remarkably well for a woman of 78. My children, however, saw it differently. They saw it not as an accident, but as a prophecy. It was the beginning of the end, the first domino to fall in a long, inevitable line, leading to helplessness. Robert had come over with a folder full of glossy brochures. "We've been worried, Mom," he'd started, his voice pitched in that infuriatingly gentle tone one uses for a frightened animal or a toddler. "The house is too much for you. The stairs, the garden. What if you fall again? And no one is here?" He spread the brochures on the coffee table. They showed smiling, silver-haired people playing bridge, participating in water aerobics, and dining in sunlit rooms. The places had names like Oakwood Meadows and Serenity Gardens. They looked like resorts for people who had forgotten how to live. I had looked from the brochures to the window, to my garden, where the last of the autumn roses were still stubbornly blooming. "This is my home, Robert," I had said, my voice quieter than I intended. "Your father and I built this life. I am not leaving it." Sarah had started to cry then. It was her most effective tool. Her tears had a way of making any resistance seem like an act of cruelty. "We just want you to be safe, Mama," she'd sobbed, clutching my hand. "We can't bear the thought of something happening to you. We love you too much. That's love." They used that word as both a shield and a cage. Their love required my confinement. Their peace of mind required the dismantling of mine. I was tired. The grief for Richard was a constant low-grade fever, and the fall had taken more of my energy than I cared to admit. I argued, but my arguments were met with a circular logic of loving concern that wore me down. Every protest was framed as confusion. Every desire to remain in my own home was treated as stubborn denial. They spoke of power of attorney papers I'd signed years ago when Richard first got sick. Papers I'd trusted them with, papers that were meant for medical decisions, to ensure Richard's wishes were honored if he couldn't speak for himself. I never imagined they would be used against me. They moved with chilling efficiency. While I was still trying to form a counter-argument, they were scheduling movers and packing boxes. They decided what I would need: a few changes of clothes, my toiletries, a handful of photographs in cheap new frames, because my old silver ones were too valuable to risk in a place like this. The rest, they assured me, would be put into storage. "We'll keep it all safe for you, Mom," Robert had promised, taping up a box that held my wedding album. Safe, like me. Packed away and kept out of sight. The day they left me here, in this beige room, was the quietest day of my life. The silence was different from the silence in my house after Richard died. That silence was heavy with memory. This silence was thin, sterile, and empty. It was the sound of being erased. Robert hugged me, a stiff, perfunctory gesture. "We'll visit on Sunday," he said. Sarah kissed my cheek, her lips cool and dry. "The nurse has our numbers. Call if you need anything." Then they were gone. The door clicked shut, and the lock, I knew, was on the outside. I sat in the unfamiliar armchair and looked at the manicured lawn where no one walked, and I understood that I had not been moved for my own good. I had been disposed of. The first few weeks were a blur of forced cheerfulness and disorientation. Nurses with bright, fixed smiles would come in to check my blood pressure and ask if I had been socializing. Residents with vacant eyes would drift down the hallways, their soft-soled slippers whispering on the linoleum. The days were structured around meals I didn't choose, activities I didn't enjoy, and medication I didn't need. I was compliant. I was quiet. I ate the bland food. I smiled at the nurses, and at night, I lay in the dark and felt the four walls of my home, the real one, wrapping around me like a phantom limb. My children visited that first Sunday as promised. They brought a potted orchid that was already starting to wilt. They talked about their lives, their work, their children. Robert's son had made the soccer team, Sarah's daughter, Chloe, was doing well in her art class. They spoke at me, not to me. They filled the beige room with their vibrant, ongoing lives, and their presence only highlighted my own stasis. They asked how I was settling in, and I gave the answer they wanted to hear. "It's very nice," I said. "Everyone is very kind." They looked relieved. Their duty was done. They could leave with clear consciences. Their visits became less frequent. Sunday became every other Sunday, then once a month. Their phone calls shortened. They were busy. Robert's business was expanding, he said. A logistics company. He had started a few years back. It was taking all his time. Sarah's husband was up for a promotion, and they were entertaining a lot. They had lives to live. I was a chapter they had closed, a loose end they had neatly tied. The only one who seemed to remember I was a person was Chloe, my granddaughter. She was 16, with kind eyes and a quiet soul. She would visit on her own sometimes after school, bringing me books from the library and her sketchbook to show me her latest drawings. She didn't fill the silence with chatter. She sat with me in it, comfortably. She would hold my hand, her young, warm fingers wrapped around my own, which were growing thinner and more translucent by the day. It was during one of Chloe's visits, about 3 months in, that the first crack appeared in the foundation of my children's careful narrative. She was telling me about a fight her mother and her Uncle Robert had. They were yelling about money, she said, her brow furrowed, and Uncle Robert kept saying things would be better soon, that the house money would be coming through any day. The house money. The words hung in the sterile air of the beige room. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "What did he mean, sweetheart?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Chloe shrugged. "I don't know, Grandma. Mom got really mad when she saw me listening. She just said it was adult business." Adult business. The business of disposing of your mother and her home, apparently. I didn't press her for more. It wasn't her burden to carry. But the seed of suspicion had been planted. The story about putting my things in storage, about keeping the house safe for me, suddenly felt thin and flimsy, like a worn-out sheet. I started paying more attention. I started listening. The world of the nursing home was its own ecosystem, with its own channels of information. My next-door neighbor, a sharp-witted woman named Evelyn, who had been a real estate agent for 40 years before her stroke, still had friends in the business. One afternoon, during our mandatory social hour in the drab common room, I casually mentioned my old address. "Such a lovely neighborhood," I said, my voice betraying none of the tremor in my hands. "I do miss my garden." Evelyn, maneuvering her wheelchair with practiced ease, gave me a sharp look. "Hickory Lane? A lovely street. A house there just sold a month ago. Went for well over asking, I heard. A young family from the city." My heart didn't stop. It didn't pound. It simply turned to a small, cold stone in my chest. I kept my expression placid. I stirred my lukewarm tea. "Oh, really?" I said, as if discussing a stranger's good fortune. "Which house was that?" She told me the number. My number. She described the big oak tree in the front yard, the rose bushes along the fence. She described my home which had been sold a month ago, my home whose contents were supposedly safe in storage, my home whose sale was funding my son's business. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in the armchair and stared out at the perfect empty lawn. The betrayal was a physical thing. It was a pressure in my chest, a bitter taste in my mouth. It wasn't just the lie. It was the sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. They had stripped me of my home, my possessions, my memories, and my agency, all while smiling and telling me it was for my own good. They had sold my life to fund their own. The next day, I made a decision. I would not confront them with tears. I would not give them the satisfaction of a hysterical, grieving mother they could dismiss as confused and emotional. I had been compliant. I had been quiet. Now I would be methodical. I needed proof, irrefutable proof that I could hold in my hand. I waited until Chloe's next visit. I asked her to do me a favor, framing it as a simple, sentimental request. "Chloe, darling," I said, my voice soft, "I was feeling a bit homesick. Would you mind looking up my old house on that real estate website you use? I'd just love to see a picture of it." Her face lit up, happy to be of service. She pulled out her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. "Of course, Grandma." A moment later, she tilted the phone towards me, and there it was, my home. The listing was still active, marked with a bright red banner. Sold. I scrolled through the pictures. The photographer had done a good job. The rooms looked bright, spacious, and completely anonymous. They had removed all our furniture, all our paintings, all our life. The walls were painted a neutral gray. My vibrant, a little bit cluttered, lived-in home looked like a sterile showroom. In the description, they called my garden, the one I had spent decades tending, a blank canvas for your landscaping dreams. They had not just sold my house. They had erased me from it. "It looks different," Chloe said, her voice hesitant. "Yes, it does," I replied, my own voice a marvel of calm. I handed the phone back to her. "Thank you, my dear. That was just what I needed to see." That was the evidence. The red sold banner was the confirmation. The cold, empty rooms in the photographs were the final, brutal truth. My children had not just moved me. They had liquidated me. I called a family meeting. I used the phone in the hallway, the one that smelled faintly of disinfectant and desperation. I did not ask them to come. I told them. I said I needed to discuss some financial matters and that it was important they both be there. My tone was firm, devoid of its usual warmth, and it must have surprised them because that they agreed without argument. They probably thought I wanted to talk about my will or complain about the food. They arrived the following Sunday, settling into the 2 visitor chairs in my beige room. Robert looked impatient, checking his watch. Sarah looked nervous, twisting the strap of her handbag. I remained seated in my armchair, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I had rehearsed this. I let the silence stretch for a moment, letting them grow uncomfortable in it. Then I began. I had a lovely chat with Evelyn the other day, I said, my voice conversational. She used to be in real estate. She was telling me a house on Hickory Lane sold recently, for a very good price. I saw the flicker of panic in Sarah's eyes. Robert's face hardened into a mask of polite confusion. "Oh," he said, "is that so?" "Yes," I continued, my gaze steady. "Number 247. A nice family from the city," she said. I was so surprised. I had thought the house was just being kept safe for me. Robert let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like tearing metal. "Mom, you must be confused. Evelyn is an old woman. You know how people in these places get things mixed up." He was gaslighting me, trying to use the very environment he had imprisoned me in as a tool to discredit my sanity. "I am not confused, Robert," I said, and the coldness in my voice made him flinch. "I saw the listing online. I saw the pictures. I saw the word sold." Sarah burst into tears. It was predictable, but no less pathetic for it. "Mama, we were going to tell you," she wailed. "We were just waiting for the right time." "The right time?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "After the money was already in your bank account? After you had spent it?" It was Robert who finally dropped the pretense. His face was flushed with anger, the defensive fury of the guilty. "All right, yes, we sold it. We had to. The upkeep was a fortune, and you weren't using it. My business needed a capital infusion. It's for the family, Mom. I'm building a legacy for your grandchildren." A legacy. He dared to use that word. "My legacy," I said, my voice like ice, "was in that house. It was in the garden your father planted. It was in the marks on the door frame. It was in every book, on every shelf, and every scuff on the floor. It was a legacy of a life, of a marriage, of a family. And you sold it. You sold it for... what? A down payment on your own ambition?" "It was for the best," he insisted, falling back on the old tired lie. "Was it for the best when you used the power of attorney I gave you in good faith for medical emergencies to sign the sale documents?" I pressed. "Was it for the best when you let me believe my possessions were in storage, when I suspect you sold most of them in an estate sale?" Sarah's sobbing was my answer to that. She couldn't even look at me. I looked from my weeping daughter to my defiant son. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The grief, the shock, the profound, soul-deep hurt. It didn't vanish, but it crystallized. It burned away all the soft maternal feelings, all the years of excuses I had made for them, all the love that I had so freely given. It left behind something cold, hard, and diamond sharp. It left behind clarity. I saw them for what they were. Not my children, but 2 selfish strangers who saw me as an obstacle and an asset, a problem to be managed and a resource to be plundered. The love I had for the children they used to be died in that beige room, and in its place a quiet, unshakable resolve was born. They thought they had buried me. They had no idea I was a seed. "Get out," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through Sarah's crying and Robert's blustering. "Mom, be reasonable," Robert started. "Get out," I pointed to the door. Both of you. This conversation is over. All of our conversations are over." They stared at me, shocked into silence by this stranger who looked like their mother. For the first time, they seemed to realize that the frail, confused old woman they had created for their own convenience did not actually exist. They saw, perhaps for a fleeting moment, the person I had always been, and it frightened them. They left without another word. When the door closed, I did not cry. I did not rage, and I sat in my chair and felt the cold, clean fire of purpose spread through me. The game had changed. They had made their move, believing I was no longer a player on the board. They were about to learn how wrong they were. My mind, which they had so casually dismissed as failing, was clearer than it had been in years. I began to make a plan. The first step was to find an ally. I could not do this alone, trapped within the walls of Serenity Gardens. I needed someone on the outside, someone professional, someone who would see me not as a confused old woman, but as a client. I thought back. Richard had always handled the finances, the legal matters, but I'd always listened. I remembered the name of his estate lawyer, a man he had trusted implicitly. Mr. Davies, a sharp, no-nonsense man who didn't suffer fools. Getting to a private phone was a challenge. Every call from the room phone went through the front desk. I needed privacy. I feigned a sudden interest in bird watching, a new hobby that required me to spend time in the little-used library at the far end of the facility. The library had a window that overlooked the service entrance and, more importantly, a dusty, forgotten payphone in a small alcove. It took me 3 days to scrounge up enough quarters from the bottom of my purse. My hand was shaking as I dialed the number I had found in an old phone book. I prayed he was still practicing. "Still there," a crisp professional voice answered. "Law offices of Davies and Finch." "I'd like to speak with Mr. Davies," I said, my voice low. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I am the widow of Richard Vance." I was put on hold. The minutes stretched into an eternity. I imagined the receptionist telling him an old woman from a nursing home was on the line. I imagined him dismissing the call. But then a familiar, dry voice came on the line. "Mr. Davies speaking, Eleanor. It's been a long time." I was sorry to hear about Richard. Relief washed over me, so potent it nearly buckled my knees. "Thank you, Arthur," I said, using his first name as Richard always had. "I am afraid I need your help. I have a problem." I laid it all out, quickly, factually, without emotion. The move to the home, the sale of my house, the power of attorney, the lies. I spoke in a low, steady voice, feeding coins into the slot as the timer beeped. I did not editorialize or complain. I just stated the facts as I knew them. He listened without interruption. When I was finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. I held my breath. "Eleanor," he finally said, and his voice was grim. "This is more than a problem. This is fraud. This is elder financial abuse. Where are you right now?" I told him the name of the home. "Don't speak to your children again," he commanded. "Don't answer their calls. Don't respond to any messages. Do not discuss this with anyone at that facility. I will be there to see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning. We have a lot of work to do." The line went dead. I hung up the heavy receiver and leaned against the wall, my entire body trembling with a mixture of fear and ferocious, exhilarating hope. Help was coming. I was no longer alone. Mr. Davies arrived precisely at 10, as promised. He was exactly as I remembered him, tall, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He had bypassed the front desk by telling them he was there to discuss my estate planning, a topic that nursing homes encourage. They gave us a small, private meeting room to use. He set his briefcase on the table and got straight to work. First things first, he said, pulling out a legal pad. I need you to sign a revocation of your previous power of attorney. We will file it immediately. That cuts off their legal authority, what little they may have been abusing. Second, we need to understand the full scope of the financial damage. For the next 2 hours, I told him everything, every detail I could remember. He asked sharp, incisive questions. He wanted dates, names, figures. He had me sign several documents, his fountain pen scratching across the paper with a sound of resolute purpose. He took the details of Robert's company, R&S Legacy Hauling. The name made him raise a single cynical eyebrow. The irony is thick enough to choke on, he muttered. All right, Eleanor, here's what happens next. I will engage a forensic accountant to trace the money from the sale of your house. We will get the banking records. We will find out exactly where every penny went. I will also pull the property records and the documents from the sale. We will see exactly how they justified their authority to the title company. He paused, his gaze meeting mine. This will get ugly, he warned. Are you prepared for that? I thought of the beige room, the sterile silence, the smiling nurses, the condescending tone in my son's voice. I thought of my garden being called a blank canvas. I thought of my wedding album being taped into a box and taken away. Arthur, I said, my voice clear and steady, I have been living in a grave they dug for me for 6 months. I am not afraid of the dark anymore. Do whatever is necessary. A flicker of something, respect perhaps, passed through his eyes. Very well, he said, packing his briefcase. I'll be in touch within 48 hours with an initial report. True to his word, he called 2 days later. The news was worse and better than I had imagined. The forensic accountant had moved quickly. The money from the house sale, a substantial sum of over $900,000, had been wired directly from the escrow account into the primary business account for R&S Legacy Hauling. It had been used to pay off massive debts and to secure a new line of credit. Robert hadn't just used my money for a small capital infusion. He had used it to save his company from imminent bankruptcy. He had gambled my entire net worth on his failing business. He's leveraged everything against that money, Eleanor, Mr. Davies explained over the phone. The company's financials were a disaster. He was weeks away from ruin. Your money didn't just help him. It was the only thing keeping him afloat. But there was more. Mr. Davies had also discovered that my investment portfolio, which Richard had carefully built over 50 years to ensure I would be comfortable for the rest of my life, had also been tampered with. Using the same power of attorney, Robert had been systematically liquidating stocks and bonds for months, small amounts at first, then larger ones. He had siphoned off nearly $200,000 before he got desperate and went for the house. Though the sheer scale of the deception left me breathless. This was not a one-time act of desperation. This was a calculated, long-term campaign of theft perpetrated by my own son, with my daughter's silent complicity. The good news, Mr. Davies continued, his voice hardening, is that he has been incredibly sloppy. He made the transfers directly. He left a paper trail a mile wide. Legally, this is an open and shut case of fraud and embezzlement. We have enough to go to the district attorney right now. We can also file a civil suit to reclaim the assets. I was silent for a moment, processing. Going to the authorities meant my son could go to prison. My daughter could be charged as an accomplice. It was a step from which there was no return. But what life was there to return to? The family I had loved was an illusion. The trust I had placed in them had been utterly betrayed. Forgiveness was not an option. Forgiveness would be a betrayal of myself and of Richard's memory. What they needed was not forgiveness. They needed consequences. There's another option, isn't there? I asked, a thought beginning to form in the cold, clear space of my mind. His company is fragile. You said he leveraged everything against my money. What would happen if that money were suddenly gone? There was another long pause on the phone. I could almost hear the gears turning in Arthur Davies' brilliant legal mind. If we froze his assets and filed a suit to reclaim the funds immediately, he said slowly, the bank would call in his loans. His line of credit would be revoked. Given the debt he was already in, it would trigger a complete collapse. He would have to declare bankruptcy. The company would be worthless. He would lose everything. And the assets of the company? I asked. The trucks, the contracts, the warehouse. What happens to them in a bankruptcy? They would be sold off to satisfy the creditors, he replied, including you, as you would be the primary creditor in this case. The plan bloomed in my mind, fully formed. It was audacious. It was poetic. It was just. That's the route I want to take, Arthur, I said. But I don't just want to be a creditor. I want to be the buyer. You want to buy the company? He asked, the first hint of genuine surprise in his voice since this had all begun. I want to buy its corpse, I clarified. I want to buy the pieces after he has been forced to liquidate. I want to own the legacy he was so keen on building with my money. Is that possible? I heard the faint rustle of papers, then a low chuckle. It was a dry, appreciative sound. Eleanor, with the capital you still have in the untouched portion of your portfolio and with the strength of your legal claim as the primary secured creditor, yes, it's not only possible, it's legally elegant. Over the next few weeks, Mr. Davies and his team worked with terrifying speed and precision. I remained in the nursing home, a quiet, forgotten old woman playing my part. I ate my beige food. I smiled my placid smile, and I waited. My children tried to call. They left tearful, then angry, then pleading voicemails on the nursing station's machine, which I instructed the nurses to ignore. They were told I was not accepting calls. They tried to visit, but I refused to see them. I had Mr. Davies send them a formal cease and desist letter, delivered by a courier. The letter informed them that all future communication was to be directed through his office. I imagined their shock, their confusion turning to fear. They were losing control of the narrative. They were losing control of me. The legal maneuvers were a thing of beauty in their brutal efficiency. Mr. Davies filed the civil suit along with an emergency motion to freeze all assets related to the fraudulent transfers. A judge, seeing the mountain of evidence, granted it immediately. The bank accounts of R&S Legacy Hauling were frozen solid. The line of credit Robert had just secured was instantly revoked. The first I heard of the fallout was from Chloe. She came to visit me, her face pale with worry. "Grandma, something is wrong," she said, her voice trembling. "Mom and Dad are fighting all the time. Uncle Robert was at the house, and he was yelling. He said he was ruined. He said you had ruined him." I took her hand. "Chloe, my darling, what is happening with your uncle is a result of his own choices, not mine. I need you to trust me on that." I looked into her worried eyes, the only eyes in my family that had ever seen me clearly. "This is all very complicated, but soon it will be over, and everything will be all right." The collapse of Robert's company was swift and total. Just as Mr. Davies had predicted, the freezing of the accounts triggered a cascade of failures. His creditors, who had been held at bay by the sudden influx of my money, descended like vultures. The bank called in its loans. He couldn't make payroll. His drivers started quitting. His clients canceled their contracts. R&S Legacy Hauling, the great legacy built on a foundation of lies, crumbled into dust in less than a month. Bankruptcy proceedings were initiated. The court-appointed trustee began the process of liquidating the company's assets to pay off the mountain of debt. And at the top of the list of creditors, with an ironclad multi-million-dollar claim, was me. Mr. Davies handled the acquisition. We didn't buy the company as a going concern. We bought its components. Through a holding company he set up for me, we purchased the fleet of trucks for pennies on the dollar. We bought the lease on the warehouse. We bought the client lists and the remaining contracts. By the time the dust settled, 6 months after I'd been left in that beige room, I was the sole owner of the physical and operational assets of what was once R&S Legacy Hauling. The final confrontation was not dramatic. There was no shouting, no tears. I arranged it to be on my terms, in a place of my choosing. Mr. Davies sent a letter to Robert and Sarah, summoning them to his office for a final settlement discussion. They came, looking haggard and defeated. I imagine they were hoping for a negotiation, a chance to salvage something from the wreckage. I was waiting for them in the conference room. I was not wearing the drab, shapeless clothes from the nursing home. I was dressed in a smart navy blue suit I'd instructed Mr. Davies to purchase for me. My hair was properly styled. I was not the frail old woman they had abandoned. I was the woman who had raised them, the woman they had underestimated, the woman who now held their entire future in her hands. They stopped dead in the doorway when they saw me. Their faces were a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Mom," Sarah whispered, as if seeing a ghost. I did not invite them to sit. I remained seated at the head of the long mahogany table. Mr. Davies stood silently by the window. "Robert, Sarah," I began, my voice even and calm. "We are here to conclude our business. As you know, your company has been declared bankrupt. Its assets have been liquidated to pay the creditors. As the primary creditor, I have acquired those assets." Robert stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. You bought my company?" "No, Robert," I corrected him gently. "I bought your trucks and your warehouse. You see, a company is more than just its assets. It's also its leadership, its vision, its integrity, and your company had none of those things. It was an empty shell, built on theft and deceit. So I just bought the useful parts." I let that sink in. I watched the color drain from his face as he understood the totality of his defeat. He hadn't just lost his business. He had been surgically dismantled by his own mother. "I have restructured the assets into a new enterprise," I continued. "It has a new name. It has new management. A very competent gentleman recommended by Arthur is taking over as CEO. And it has a new purpose." I slid a single document across the polished table towards them. It was the charter for the new company. The name on the top read, "The Chloe Vance Educational Trust." "All profits from this new logistics company," I explained, "will be placed into a trust fund. That trust will be used to provide educational scholarships and grants. It will be administered by a board, and its sole beneficiary and future chairwoman, upon her graduation from university, will be my granddaughter, Chloe." I looked at Sarah. "You will have no access to it. You will have no control over it. But your daughter's future and the future of many other children will be secured by the legacy you and your brother tried to steal." Sarah finally broke. A low, guttural sob escaped her lips. "Mama, please," she begged. "We're sorry. We made a terrible mistake. We have nothing left." "A mistake," I said, the word tasting like poison, "is forgetting to buy milk at the store. What you did was a deliberate, calculated betrayal. You took my home, my security, and my trust, and you set it on fire to warm your hands. And you are wrong. You do have something left. You have each other." I stood up. For me, the meeting was over. Arthur will show you the final papers. They release you from any further civil liability in exchange for you signing over any and all claims you believe you may have to my estate. It is, I assure you, a far better deal than you deserve." The district attorney was very interested in my case, but I have decided that poverty and obscurity are a more fitting punishment for you than prison. I walked toward the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. I looked back at them one last time, these two strangers who wore my children's faces. They looked small and broken, huddled together in the grand, intimidating office. I felt nothing, not pity, not anger, not even satisfaction. I felt only a vast, quiet emptiness, the space where my love for them used to be. "You told me this was all for my own good," I said, my voice soft but carrying the weight of everything that had happened. "And in a way, you were right. It was, because it showed me who you truly are. It forced me to save myself. And for that, I suppose I should thank you." I walked out of the conference room and did not look back. I left them in the ruins of the life they had tried to build on top of mine. The aftermath was quiet. Mr. Davies informed me that they signed the papers without a fight. They lost their homes, their cars, their social standing. Robert and his wife divorced. Sarah and her husband were struggling. They faded from my life like a bad dream. I never heard from them directly again. I moved out of the nursing home the day after the papers were signed. I did not move back to my old house. The memories there were tainted now. Instead, I found a beautiful, light-filled apartment in the city with a large balcony that was perfect for a container garden. Life found a new rhythm, a quiet, peaceful rhythm that was entirely my own. I woke when I wanted. I ate what I wanted. I spent my days reading and tending to my flowers. I reconnected with old friends. I took a pottery class. I discovered the simple, profound joy of a life lived without obligation to anyone but myself. The weight I had carried for so long, the weight of being a wife, a mother, a caretaker, was lifted. I felt light. Chloe was my constant joy. She visited me every weekend. We would have tea on the balcony, and she would tell me about her school, her friends, her dreams. I told her stories about her grandfather. I taught her how to tell a healthy rose from a sick one. I saw in her the best parts of our family: Richard's quiet strength, my resilience, and a kindness that was all her own. She was the true legacy. Not a company, not a house, but a person of integrity and grace. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I think about what they did. The betrayal doesn't sting anymore. It's a scar, a part of my story, but it no longer has the power to hurt me. They thought my life was over. They saw me as a final chapter to be managed. But they were wrong. My life was not over. It was just waiting for me to claim it. They put me in a box, but they forgot that I was the one who held the key. It is never too late to turn the page and start a new chapter. It is never too late to decide that you are the author of your own story. And my story, I decided, was far from over. It was just getting to the good part.